Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to day 6. Wow, you mean down the stretch on Agile, and this is the second day on Kanban. And then the next session really will be a summary session of what we've heard throughout, and then perhaps some discussion amongst the team as to the thoughts about our ability to apply it and such. And I'm sure there'll be, if we think that's the thing that we should do, I'm sure Don will be wanting us to schedule some other conversations so we can start setting up to do it. So, before I go into the next step, I just want to review, since it has been over a week, and I think there may be a few people here who couldn't make it last time. So, the thing about Kanban, right, is it can be eased into the environment as opposed to a total redo of the environment, going to Scrum for 2 week or 4 week, whatever it is, sprints. So the idea is to enter it into a existing development team and begin to put a structure in place, but not disrupt how they do their business today, and then just gradually over time improve things. It's a continuous delivery model, not a iteration-driven model. Yet we still do frequent deliveries, and we'll talk about what that means today. We didn't get to that part last week. Work is pulled into the process, not pushed. So basically, there's work waiting. When the team is ready for more work, they pull the highest priority work in the queue and work on it.
Refresh me on what push would be. Someone telling...
Push would mean somebody saying, yeah, right, do this now, right? Now, of course, there'll be exceptions. The primary exception that we're allowed for is, I think what they call expedited. In our world, that would mean critical ticket. And a critical ticket basically is pushed in, and it gets absorbed. We don't allow any more capacity for it, and it gets addressed. It's obviously going to slow down progress on some of the other things in progress. But other than that, the team should be pulling stuff based on the priorities that others have set, and that's one of the things we'll talk about today too. One of the great things about Kanban, right, is it supports multiple sources of work and types of work. When I mean sources, remember we talked about in Scrum, pretty much you're doing a project or a product, not multiple things at the same time. But in Kanban, we can support multiple sources of work. It could be within one project, it could be project and maintenance work and support work, and divide it up. And it supports the classification of those various types of work items. You can allocate capacity. You can say based on history, X% of our time is used for defect support in production. X% is used on maintenance of the environment, and X% is available for production. And you can kind of set those parameters and allocate your capacity accordingly. And over time, you can start setting SLAs, but I'm more looking at service level objectives based on the type of work that you're being fed. The key enabler for Kanban is limiting the working process. And so limiting the amount of work in process is the essential enabler. The recipe for success, based on David Anderson, is the items shown here. First, focus on quality, reduce the work in process, and the key item, deliver often, and balance demand against throughput is another way of control the work in process. The team can only do so much effectively at any one time, and so you have to balance the work that's coming in against their capacity and not try to force feed, push for extra capacity. Prioritization is a key element that I alluded to. It's basically up front in the queue, there'll be a prioritization process that puts stuff in the queue waiting to be done, and the activity to pull work into the process should be heavily influenced by the priority of the work in the queue. And then Kanban gives us some vehicles to recognize some sources of variability, to recognize some problems like backlogs and blockages and things like that. And for those especially that are repeating, give us the impetus to go forward and find out how we can fix that so we can increase it. Just like Scrum, Kanban has a card wall, but the card walls are a little different. It has a little more detail on it, and it models initially simply the development process that we're in the environment we're moving into with Kanban. It introduces buffers between the major steps in the development process so that any individual organization can keep working, right? And then if something gets into their buffer, it's basically their input queue. They still keep working on the stuff they're working at capacity, and so it smooths the process. So basically, we have the input queue, which would be basically the prioritized work. There's the analysis and design phase. There's a ready for development phase, and I just extracted one from the last week. In this case, pointing out that there seems to be a little bit of a bottleneck because we're not getting our stuff through development as fast as we would like. We're building up a bottleneck. Ready for test, and then done. So that's not like what it has to be, but that is a typical one, and we would decide what ours needed to look like. This is pretty much our development process, so I'm just decent start. In the card wall is used in very vivid ways show where there's problems. So in this case, there's a big yellow sticky, and we agreed as a team that yellow sticky means something's blocked. And whatever is written on that yellow sticky says what is blocked, and whatever information the person who's blocked can give, so that we can go forward and resolve it. Stand-up meeting is still a key element of Kanban, except it is focused around the wall. And initially, we'd be talking about a physical wall. There are electronic walls, tools like Jira that we'll be adopting later. But at least for the near term, we should use physical walls. So 15 minutes around the walls, same time every day, sounds familiar. Focus on raising and identifying situations and issues. So somebody needs help. Maybe they're blocked because there's a piece of knowledge that they don't have and they need some help with that. Or they're developing a fairly large backlog and they could use some extra help if someone's available on the team to help in their work. With log issues, assign issues out of the meeting. Any issues that can quickly resolve in the meeting we do, but it's only 15 minutes, so most likely you're going to log it, and you may have a few people stay behind after the meeting to discuss the issue a bit further. So maybe you can even resolve it, or at least make a plan to resolve it.
But we wouldn't, is the thought that we would really have a card wall, or are we going to use or try and use a Jira?
We would definitely use a physical card wall for this toy wall, or we're piece in this, so we have something we can congregate around and physically move stuff one place to the other. Whether we felt like it would be more efficient to do an electronic one, I think we could do that, but I think we would need the routine of doing it that way. The easier routine, I think.
Yeah, I think it makes it work and gets you into the whole mechanism a little better.
And if you were moving the things in the daily stand-up, I think they gives you a sense of accomplishment too. It's tangible. And results that, hey, we'll get these 5 things, they're all kind of sliding in the right direction. So at least that's my thought. I think if we pilot something in HR, payroll, and finance, we'll do it that way for sure.
Okay, so now let's get into day 2 of Kanban. One of the things on the recipe for success is deliver often. Well, in Scrum, we know deliver often basically is driven by the length of the sprint. So you come out of the sprint, you deliver whatever was the set of work that was assigned to that sprint and move on. But Kanban is a continuous process. It's not iterative in the same way that Scrum is. So what does deliver often mean? It introduces the concept of release planning, and basically there's a release planning meeting. The frequency of it is determined basically empirically. Right? You take a set of first initial time, and then as things settle in, you decide what is the best frequency. But it's a meeting that's led by the PM, but the participants are the developers, the testers, the folks who are involved in deploying in our environment what we deliver, and the functional business and technical management. So the owners, business owners, all of them, right? So they're going to balance which items are ready for release, what is required to release each of those elements, right? So doing a release is not free, right? Every time we do a release, well, okay, the guys and I know have to do their work, technical verification has to happen, some level of functional verification has to happen, it's free. And if there's a problem, work has to be done. So what is required is important. There's always the question of who needs to know.
So when you say release items to production, you need items to field tested, right? Not to production.
No, this is to production, because we've already gone through test.
Because you are changing it. I mean, you are delivering it often. So you wouldn't move to production piece like this.
We will deliver based on our work in process limitations, right? And a lot of those deliveries will be pieces of a bigger piece.
Right.
When the bigger piece is complete, it's ready to go into the release plan and say, when are we going to release it? Okay. And the release plan can be forward-looking and say, we think the rest of this will be done in this time frame, so you can look out a little bit. And if you're saying you're going to do a release every month, let's say, you would say, based on where we're at, where do we think we're going to be at the end of the month, what would be ready to be released, that sort of thing. The big question, of course, and one of our big questions, do we require a production outage to put this stuff in? Because that's obviously potentially non-trivial, depending on how long and when. How much testing are we going to have to do after we deploy it to make sure it's good? Is it just nominal testing like we do for some bugs that put in? Or is it going to require a more complete set of functional testing and technical validation to do it? Think explicitly about the risks, how to mitigate those risks, what contingency plans we need to have in place if there's ones that we think have significant risk, how a contingency plan may this mean, how we can get out of what we just did, right? We get back to it. And then who? What's the team involved in deploying the release and validating the release, testing the release? Of course, how long it will take, and the other logistics. So in our world, we pretty much address those items in change plans and QRB documentation. Right? But what this would really call for is us paying a little more attention than we do to some of those items, the risk assessments, and thinking about, how much disruption are we doing to people's lives if it's requiring people to work evenings? How much disruption are we doing in terms of downtime and trade-off, because deliveries aren't free, and we have to think about that explicitly. So the best thing is to set a regular release cadence, and it's based on the dynamics of the environment. So it could be bi-weekly, it could be monthly, it could be every 6 weeks, whatever. Okay. And as I talked about in the last chart, what is the business cost of the release? And business cost includes technical team, the broader sense of the business, not just talking about the business as an customer.
When you say that by release, you define that as this, all the work up to getting into production, or just the actual physical act of getting it live?
The act of getting it live.
Okay, just that piece.
Yeah.
Which we would probably call the deployment.
Right.
Basically,
what does it cost?
Getting ready for QRB and executing QRB.
And the deployment and the validation.
Yeah. Okay.
So one of the other items on the recipe for success is to balance demand against throughput. So remember, one of the key enablers, the key enabler for Kanban is limiting the working process. So what that will likely mean, certainly would mean in our environment at the get-go, is there's going to be a whole lot more stuff people want done than we can get done. I mean, we know that today, right? If we implement this, there's control that says, yes, but the team can only get this much done and delivered at this point in time. Over time, we anticipate refining and using those cues and looking for where we have blockages and increasing the throughput of the team. So we can get more through, but at any one time we have to live with the reality that only this much can get delivered at any one time. So, so there's a backlog triage effort that's required. And what happens is people put stuff into the backlog, right? So this needs to be, this needs to be, this needs to be. And then eventually, backlog is going to get pretty big. So periodically, and they suggest monthly, quarterly, similar, yearly, it's, depends on the environment. You get the business people and the technical management people together, which is primarily a business thing, to look at each item, and it's a simple, well, given where we are, does this still needed? Yes, no. It's no, it's gone, it's yes, it stays. And you just go through it, and the business people make the decision whether this has become overcome by events, and So we should just remove it from the backlog.
So can I ask a dumb question? So we talked a little bit earlier in the review that you're going to pull items out of the queue into the work in progress, essentially, right?
Correct.
So is the backlog the queue, or is the queue something after the backlog?
The queue is something past the
That's
backlog.
what I thought. So the backlog is it's really just sitting there, no priority. It would get pulled into the queue once it's a priority. It still may not get work done yet, but at least the hopper can be looked at. Okay. So,
Also, as the items come are pulled, are they at all related? I mean, I'm just thinking like, does someone order, like, say our revenue queue. If I just took from the oldest to the newest and say this is our backlog for work that needs to be done. I mean, but someone, would have to be, they organized so that they're related work, say in the same area, vendor related or...
Certainly if there's certain efficiencies that can be gained to say, hey, if I take these two, I'm going to get a lot of leverage out of it. That's something you ought to factor into the decision.
Like the team lead would make the decision of what actually gets pulled?
The team would make the decision as to what actually would build. Clearly, the team lead having a simple decision.
Okay.
So we have to prioritize and prioritize things that are ready to go in. We think are ready to be fed, so they're ready to be pulled at the appropriate time. And one of the things we avoid doing in Kanban is the argument before the project has even been maybe defined in the sense of the design, functional requirements, what the priority is, right? It's, it's this priority, and you get all these, debates back and forth. Well, in this case, the stuff gets in, gets defined, and when it gets to the point where there's going to be a prioritization meeting, now's where the rubber meets the road, and primarily the business people get together, and they're not doing it in a kind of an ether. They're doing it based on what is going on right now. And there should be a lot easier for them to agree that, I'm KK, and I really, really, want that. That's a bad example because it would be a business person, right? But I recognize that, procurement, the problem that you need solved is more urgent right now, and so it gets higher priority. So prioritization happens the best time for it to happen, which is when the work is at a point where it can be put into the work queue. So again, the business stakeholders, the PM, the development manager, and senior IT managers, right? So those are the people who sit there, but the big players in it are the business stakeholders. The others are really supporting actors, answering questions about things that the business folks might have about getting the work done and implications of it. So, and the goal of it is to refill the input queue to the volume that is appropriate given the current throughput of the team. So that's the question, right? Given the productivity of the team, what are the next highest priority items for them to take on?
So if you knew that the team was up and running and they were, whatever the interval was, say it's a month, so you're doing 10 a month, you wouldn't put 50 more things in the queue. You'd probably drop another 5 or 10 so that that's stuff to wait on.
Right.
That's what you're kind of saying, right?
Yes.
Keep it reasonable.
Yes.
So you drop it in the queue doesn't mean they have to work on it right away. It's just the next thing that they can consider pulling in.
Right, but it will have now a priority associated with it, so relative to the other things, so if it makes, now's where some judgment comes in, right? I've got something 95% done, and if I take this next one in, it's going to be done, maybe I do that before I take the next priority item.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So those sorts of things have to be
There's relative priorities too, right? You could have a higher priority that you know you don't have any people to work on. It might require a certain developer or a type of resource, and you'd be better off picking the second prioritized item because you have people that work on that.
Right.
So you're using, again, judgment.
Right.
Again.
So, again, basically, this is on-demand prioritization. And hopefully, as that culture is integrated into the environment, people get bought into that. Now, there's no sense in arguing about it now because it's not going to happen now. It's going to happen later, and that's the best time to decide what the priorities are.
And it sounds like, seems like this and Scrum, we have the same decision point, which is how big are these teams? Because you're prioritizing across what groups.
Right.
Right. No matter how big we make it, there's still somebody else we can include, I suppose.
Right.
It's everyone that works in this building. We still, what if we need DBAs or admins?
Right.
You know, there's always some level you have to. So that's one of our key decision points. I think is how big we draw that circle.
Yeah, and I don't think you want to draw it too big. I think you definitely.
I think the same. It's just that I think there have to be some side negotiations for getting Sharon's help, for getting change management's help, for getting, if we include them, it's still for getting. Let's say I do a circle that's just TA and Kenny. Well, there's many times where Robin needs Kenny's help or vice versa to get work done. So that's just, I think those
stuff we have to
right?
adapt. This is the pure, and you have to adapt to the pure. And we talked last time about change management being one of the key ones, right? Is how do we best do
better
that?
for us to start smaller rather than 50 people in a work team. I don't know how we manage that.
And the portal effort, obviously, you're not going to have a portal person dedicated 100% to a team because you don't have that many people on the site.
Right.
But that's the beauty of this, right? These are dedicated projects. You've got multiple things on your plate. Scrum is a dedicated project.
Scrum is dedicated. This allows for multiple things on your plate, but it's still not an EA-wide.
Multiple things on your plate with the expected capacity, and the capacity would have to extend to groups that need to fulfill the requirements. So you might be, we'd have to, let's say we do something and say, well, I know I'm going to need some now help and some portal help, but how much help you need, not how much. A 10 per person over a month, you might be able to pull, not a full person over the course of a month. So I think that's where we get into the negotiation, right?
And the timing of that.
Yeah, I mean, whether you could or not, whether we can pull something out of the backlog in the queue but maybe it's now has no available bandwidth for 2 more months. So that, I guess that's part of the whole.
It's got to be.
Nothing's perfect. It still doesn't excuse us being able to talk to each other. Right? All right. At least picture this how this works over there.
So here's the Agile Framework for Kanban, right? So we basically talked about triaging sources. Let's talk about sources first, right? Before, it all went down from here for Scrum, requirements, high-level design, stories, epics, right? Get into the backlog, then they fill the input queue and work, sprint. Well, that path still exists into the backlog. Now we have others, bugs, right, in stuff that's in development or in test if it's command. Be in production. And I'm sure there's others, but those were the 2 that I added to the chart. They all get in here, and at the right time, they get prioritized and fed into the work queue. Right? And then we make sure that we don't exceed our work in process rule. And we talked about last time that ultimately the experience, at least to date, suggests that a best case work in process is like 1 or 2 pieces of work, cards or whatever, per person on the team. But you don't start there. You start with a lot higher, because we know we don't have a finely tuned process, and we're going to run into bumps and stops a lot more often early. So you want to make sure that the person who stopped has something right now to pick up and move on with. Right? But then as you smooth the process, the tighter you make the work in process, the higher the team goes.
So, interesting though, I thought you would pull the work from the work backlog.
No, you pull the work from the work queue.
Right.
To keep.
There's a prioritization effort. Okay, so let me try this. There's the work backlog that's being fed in, right? Maybe every day, right? Periodically, there's the triage. This one goes bye-bye. That one goes bye-bye, so it'll come by things, right? But so now I've got a triage backlog. But now it comes to whatever is the time that we've set for doing prioritization. And now, in prioritization, we're going to look at this, and we're going to agree what are the next highest priority things to get done that we should put into the queue for the team to run.
Because in Kanban, all new work of any type goes to the backlog first. That's where it starts. Right. It may quickly get out if it's something critically urgent, but it goes there first.
Yeah, and you might even say, well, the critical ticket never even goes there.
They bypass.
It goes right in.
I would agree with that, but that's the one exception, perhaps.
Correct.
Does that make more sense? That's what I was trying to get to earlier, is just understanding the flow.
So we make sure we aren't taking on more work than we're supposed to. We go through the working process, very similar. Daily stand-up, resolving issues. Concepts very similar from Scrum. You go to things done, and then the release planning has hopefully looked forward and said, this is what we think will be done, and then we have a regular release cadence. So it may end up being a very small release. It may end up being a larger release. It'll be based on what can be completed at that time. Tax sources of variability, another element on the success. So you want to increase the predictability and improve quality, the tactical and strategic advantage. And how are we doing that? We're doing that by, from a development team standpoint, looking at what's happening through our process. How do we improve it? What are we going to change to reduce backlogs? If we're seeing we're having quality problems, why are we having quality problems, and what do we need to change? We talked last week about there's different things we can do as an organization to improve quality, everything from doing a design effort that's a collaborative effort, and to code reviews, peer code reviews, all those lists of things we talked about last time can be applied to improve quality for having quality issues. Okay. So, if you remember, at the end of a Scrum cycle, there's a demo to the business owner, right? And then there's the review, the team review of what happened, what was good, what wasn't so good, and the basically reflection, I forget the word right now, where you go, okay, what are we going to change next time, right? This is sort of going on, we don't have a full demo here, but this is going on continuously here. But one of the good things about the Scrum thing was the business was getting visibility to all that's getting done because we're demoing it, right? So that's where in Kanban you add in what they call regularly scheduled operations reviews. And that's senior management, team leads. They basically review what's happened since the last one. They see the metrics that say, hopefully demonstrate that we're performing at or better than we were last time. Right? Discuss issues and have the, what can we improve? And what we can improve can be anything in this process, right? Not just in here.
How regular would those meetings be, in any sense? Say we had a monthly release process. Is it monthly? Is it less than that?
No, I don't think it would be less than that. If we had a monthly release process, we might do it monthly, we might do it bi-monthly.
Okay, so even potentially every couple.
Right.
All right, so not that frequent. All right.
It just, we have to adapt it to our release cadences. Okay. So, is Kanban agile? So this is the Agile Manifesto. So to be agile, you have to kind of meet these standards. You focus on individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Is that still true in Kanban? Yeah, I think it's true. Working software over comprehensive documentation. Is that still true? Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Still true?
Still the same, yeah.
And responding to change over following a plan.
Yeah.
Right?
And the keys, I mean, flexibility 4 can't tell us that.
Exactly. And the fact that anything can get into the backlog at any time. So, yeah, it's quite different, but Kanban is still an agile approach. I talked about at the beginning that there's different classifications of work that you can find. So that's the idea of there's multiple work items. This isn't just working on a project. Again, right? So what could be coming in? User stories. We're working on a enhancement. And so there's user stories associated with it. That's kind of the same as coming in from Scrum. Bugs from perhaps what's already in process, or what should be from what's in process because if it's done, it would be a defect. Production defect problems, maintenance work. Exactly.
Example of that, right?
Yep. Change requests. And so on, right?
So what would have changed? I'm trying to make sure I understand the difference when you say change request and a bug. A bug would be, you know, we're finding a problem or something different with something that's already in flight, right?
Correct. A bug is something that you are developing now that went to test it. It's going back.
So a change request, would that be a request to change something we've already agreed to work on? More of a selective thing?
It could be something that's smaller. I kind of be change request and user stories.
Now I'm trying to differentiate.
Kind of similar. I would view a change request as a small request, whereas if it's a user story, it's a larger enhancement or new development we're doing, and we're doing that analysis.
Change request would be to say something we didn't make come to QRB, it's so small.
No, if it's a change request, it would definitely have gone to ARB, DRB. It might just be that it's a relatively small item, And, but somebody said, it isn't a defect, because that would be dealt that way. But somebody said, if I just had this little extra thing, this would be so much faster. So it's a minor enhancement.
Okay.
Thank you. That's the word. So we have at least these, and I would assert that probably. I included change requests.
Yeah, I think that's how they categorize it. It's just different size requirements, right?
Do we have any other types?
I mean,
Kathleen, anything else you can think of? That just falls into a category other than that?
you got production problems, critical finish. There's really one category with two different things, right? But I think it's smart to break it out because you might have a different process.
Yes, definitely, because the critical ticket is an expedite. Right, that's why it's broken out separate.
And maintenance would be routine changes, even though there's an internal routine.
Yep. If there are things that need the team to work on. Tools.
I meant more support items that are routine, that occur every month or every
Well,
whatever.
and that will, I think that raises the question, how do we apply this, right? If there's work that's operational work that happens routinely and is ongoing, right? And in some cases that's, with rare exception, all functional work, right? So that's probably to the side and doesn't fit into this model because this model is assuming development, functional test, a more fully complete development need. So how do we account for those other types of work that we might say are outside the Kanban process? Is something that needs to be a decision made collectively.
Okay. Some more of the variable work they should be trying to push into here. So that's a fixed thing. If every Monday morning every week spends an hour looking at the batch jobs from the previous week, that would not be something you can push in here. It's something we can say she doesn't have as much time available as somebody else because of that.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's my thought. But
Yeah, we can talk more as a group and how we would do it, but that seems reasonable.
we haven't talked about estimation. We've talked about prioritization. We haven't talked about estimation. And estimation, again, is critical because how much work in process you have is kind of tied to, how big it is. So we already have user stories have story points, so we know that one, right? What do we use for bugs and these other items? Basically, we do a rough relative estimate. And we already have the vehicle for that we may want to refine, mind you, but we have very low, medium. We have used that approach. And it's kind of in our culture. There's some work we need to do on it to adjust it, but basically that concept's there, right? We also have high, very high, extremely high. For purposes of Kanban, anything that's that big has to be decomposed into smaller elements. Okay, so it still has to be delivered, but you're not going to chug 120 hours worth of work.
So that's for just the bug suppression problems and maintenance, or for everything?
Well, I think it would also apply to user stories. There's a user story or an epic, let's say, that if you looked at the epic, remember that's mostly comparative sizing, but in essence that looked like it was 120 hours, but it has to be broken down into user stories that are smaller. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just thinking because you have to deliver things, so you want to have it broken down into small work packages. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm just thinking of something we delivered a while back. So camera shell engine model. So you'd ideally, what you try to do with that is you would chunk it up into a series of deliverables over multiple releases, and that's what you would do with it.
Whether you do it over multiple releases will depend upon whether you can deliver it in steps.
Well, right, but that was 200-ish technical hours.
Right.
For one developer.
So it's not going in all in one. So it's got to be divided up.
Right. It wasn't really split upable, where that's going to be assigned to Prasad, Amardeep, and Paula, who was really one person's task. So how would you do that?
You would do the effort to break it up into smaller pieces. You would get it into the backlog in the smaller pieces. You go through the prioritization, and then you pull the pieces. But you make sure that the relationships between certain pieces are clear, right? This and this are related.
Each piece would be, even if it's one product, each piece could be a step at which it can be shown to someone. It's at least
It could be.
You can build the online, make it up. You could build the online screens.
Right.
And within the guts of working it. And then you could put in whatever else, and then add the final piece last.
That, you know, and if it divides up like that, you could do that, and that would be good, because that's sort of a Scrum thing, but it
Right.
has the benefit of that Scrum thing.
We're getting back to, you get validation points way before you're off the rails.
Right.
So
You can kind of meld those. But it's also possible that, you know, there's such a big, let me say, infrastructure piece, that it's going to take 4 chunks, if you will, 4 pieces of work in process to get it done, and they're not all going in at the same time. And so they'll get into that release bucket, but they won't be released until they're all there.
they'll be in the done column, but not deployed.
Correct.
So that was yours. I mean, you literally could put that in number 5 releases show, 40 hours per release. And we have to come up with what the breakpoints are. After the first release, what are we expecting to we're going to be the proof that we're done. What would be the deliverable, whether it's a show and tell session, whether it's something. So, but I like that. The bigger the project, I think it's more important to set breakpoints. So to make sure that we don't reach 200 hours because he did a great job coding to requirements that people didn't specify correctly, right? And
We had like the search piece, you know, so there was search page, change could have been a break, and then the actual JD entry page,
right.
separate areas in there.
To the extent you can break them up into things that when they come out are demonstrable, you know.
So that's good. So that still supports that type of project. That's one of the bigger development efforts we've done once it's 9 months.
So if we have all these work in process types, how do we allocate our capacity? And I think, you know, the team, once again, we talk about, well, on average, where do we think our time is spent? And what is a good balance to set up for Kanban, and we will adjust based on experience, right? But you could say 50% for production problems, 30% is for user stories, basically meaning some user enhancement, right? 5% is for fixing bugs and stuff that
Just keep that in display.
right? And 15% is maintenance. I made that up, okay, but that's the sort of thing you would do. And so when you came to pulling items out of the work queue, those are factors to consider also. Right? Am I now all of a sudden making user stories 50% of what's in process? Do I really want to do that? And there may be a time when you do, but in general, you probably don't. Right? You want to set these capacities and sort of stick to swim lanes, and then adjust the percentages based on experience. Now, some of this stuff is, I would say, is phase 2, okay? And this is one of the things I would say is phase 2, right? Not all work items are equal, right? So there's a class of service concept that ultimately would lead to a service level objective, right? So you can say, and we wouldn't do that for the expedite items, the critical tickets, because they by definition are highest priorities, okay? But for all the others, you know, you could say that production defects are higher priority than blah, and down the line. And then you're going to have to balance it with what you're working through. So it's a multi-dimensional problem, right? And based on the allocations, in the end, you could come up with a service level objective that says, once it gets, there's going to be a couple of measures. Once it gets into the input queue, we're going to have that work out in a certain amount of time. Right? So there's going to be several measures we'll look at in a minute. When we go to having different service classes, on the wall we would indicate those by different card color, by a star or something, a gold star, silver star, whatever that says what the class of service is. It's assigned when it enters the work queue. So when they're saying, yes, this is going to go in to the backlog to be selected from. Okay, any question about that?
No.
Okay.
It's clear.
And then there's we have classes that we definitely have these, right? We know about expedite, critical problems, right? And gets immediate service. That's the one thing that allows us to exceed our work in process limit. You try to constrain to only have one of those in flight at a time, if at all possible. And we don't allocate capacity. They happen, they come in, we know we've stretched the team a bit, they're going to be the number one priority until they're done. Fixed delivery date. We're coming up to students enrolling for classes, and this is an essential change for that. Well, we've got to get that done by that date, right? So fixed delivery date, statutory things need to be ready with the tax updates for very specific times, or we're not going to be compliant. So fixed delivery dates should be things that are driven by these kinds of imperatives, not just, I want this by July 1st, right? If there's not one of these things behind it, it really shouldn't be considered a fixed delivery date, unless it was a chant rose. And then there's standard, which is, this is what we need to get done, but there isn't a have-to-have by the state. And then the last one is as available. It's work we want to get done. When we can allocate some capacity to do it, but it's, it's kind of like the things we're talking about now is, if you can fit it in, if you have a little slack time, you can fit it in and do some progress on it, do it. But you're going to focus mostly on these.
So how do you reconcile those to the release, right? So if you have this team, you release them every fourth Friday, or I think that's something, right? Every fourth Thursday you allow the PRB, right? That's when you put stuff in. So it seems like expedite would violate that all the time.
By definition, yes.
Would any of the other ones? I I mean, I wouldn't think you'd want to be flexible on the other ones.
Fixed delivery day could violate our Thursday if it has a go in on Monday or Tuesday.
Good
as an
point.
example.
And I suppose a tax update could.
Because that could be a fixed delivery date.
Yeah, and generally those
Yeah.
got to be in when we get them, or at least certain times a year, and I'm sure Julie has the same issue on hers, right? So that's the one concern I see is that you have this release model, and then you're going to violate it every other minute.
And that's kind of reality.
I know, I just wonder if we can get further. But that's
For
our
these-
current reality. I think the value in this is getting away from our current reality as much as possible.
So let's talk about that. For a fixed delivery date, and the presumption here is we know about this.
So it's going to be pretty
When we're doing release planning, right, you ought to be thinking about, well, the priority of this needs to be high enough, ideally, so that it's ready to go live the release before it's needed. That's what you'd be trying to do, right? Obviously, you might not always be able to do that, in which case, yes, you're going to violate the release date because the next standard release date is too late. But you should be planning so that you release it on a standard cadence at a time that meets the requirement.
We kind of do that now. We release things on Thursdays and Tuesdays.
That's a little bit too standard of a cadence for me.
Right.
I think we got to do better. But I get there's going to have to be some hybrid.
Standard, we really say is urgent. Is that versus normal development, it's steady development, you know?
Yeah.
You know, you mean
The wording is, yeah, it's the same, just the same as what you're talking about. It's the normal stuff we're doing. We wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't important enough to be doing it. So urgent may not have been the.
so expedite is really it wouldn't have to be, it's a critical production problem, but the chancellor calls us after getting, says I need this query by tomorrow.
Yeah.
That would be expedite. It's not a production issue.
And really expedite is the only one that we should not know in advance when our deployment will be.
Yes.
That's what I would go.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly where my head's at. Is the first one, it breaks the model, the other one's not. And you might have to make some extraordinary deployment decisions.
Yeah.
But it really fits
But
into
it's
the
planned.
release. Right, planned it in the release.
But remember that obviously we just talked about. Fixed delivery dates are ones that we need to pay a lot of attention to meet that date. These, we may have a goal we want to meet, but those are the ones that are going to get adjusted, right? And when it gets released,
Depending on
when
the
it gets
expedite
released.
that comes in and what issues related to the fixed delivery date.
Exactly.
Okay. Just better play with this to see how we want to do it.
So, metrics for Kanban. You can come up with a lot. I think the basic ones that we would want to set up to track are the 4 here. Cycle time basically is from the time the element was pulled in to the process until it was done in the release queue. Not necessarily released, but in the release queue. Okay. Customer lead time is the one that says what on average, and you maybe these might be one of those things that you measure based on the class of service, right? But somebody drops something into the work backlog. What's the average time from then till it gets and enters the release queue? Throughput, you know, how much we deliver over time, and what are we actually doing in work in process? And that's an important one. We really, especially early on, we're saying work in process is X on a daily, weekly, whatever basis. Are we sticking to that? You know, and the answer is it'll vary a little bit, but it should be varying around what we said. The variance should be huge. And these are, fortunately, easy to measure.
Okay.
That's it for today.